So we have these exceptions still, sort of nationalistic symbols, if you look at it. At the time, people didn't think that that would be very significant for our participation in Europe, but it turned out that exactly in these areas, cooperation increased, and now it's 20 years ago almost, and we're still stuck with these exceptions, which are not sort of seen from the political elite very helpful for Denmark. The problem is you need to have a new referendum to get rid of them. So we have an exception, for instance, on the economic and monetary union, that we're not going to be participating in what is called the third phase of that union, and the third phase is where you get the euro and where you now also have to take upon yourself the new tools that the union is going to have. The UK is somewhat of the same thing. I haven't followed why they decided, but I think if you look at the support for Europe in the Conservative Party in the UK, you get an idea why they have gone down a similar road. So we have a situation in Europe where you have 17 countries who are part of the Eurozone and 10 who are outside the Eurozone. And 2 of those 10 countries, Denmark and the UK, has said we're not going to participate in the Euro unless we decide so, but the rest is actually on track to become parties to the Eurozone and become get the Euro. It's only a technical question of when they fulfill the different economic criteria for doing so. Was that okay?
Oh, I have the microphone. Okay.
I have a follow-up question on the politics. You were asked about the politics in 2 dimensions. One is, one of the elements of the mooted PSI deal is 30 billion euros of support for the bondholders. And I'm just wondering how the politics of that plays in Europe. If capital of banks in Western Europe needed shoring up, would that not be a more efficient use of that money as opposed to just cycling it to bondholders? But how does that play in the world of politics? And talk to us a little bit about the recent ideas of having a commissar who would police the adjustment process. And maybe after the ambassador addresses that, maybe Mr. Baker can talk to us a little bit about what that means for the institutional role of the IMF in these situations.
The first question I pose, I think I'll give over to the economist on the panel, because it's getting too technical for me to be sure to hit the nail. On the second one, I think this is part of the, I would say, the political pressure that you see building up to get political support in Greece for taking the necessary measures. And of course, it would be nice to have somebody there looking after how the money is going to be worked. I know there's some idea of having a closed account that you can control and then only pay money to things that you want to do. Of course, this is something which is a red cloth in Europe because it infringes on national sovereignty, and this is why you have seen these very strong reactions from Greece. I think it's more posturing than politics, to be honest.
Well, I mean, when on sort of redeploying funding for recapitalization of banks, I think that's basically what you're asking. So that a lot of people have raised that. I guess the thing that you have to keep in mind, I mean, sort of modern sort of financial systems are based a lot on having what we call like a risk-free sort of reference rate, and that is always the sovereign, right? And a big part of the Eurozone crisis is that right now we have a situation where that's not true with a lot of the sovereigns. They are not considered risk-free. There's actually substantial credit risk. And so, and again, capitalization in the Southern European banking sectors was never the problem. I mean, their capital ratios were quite high. They didn't have high levels of, they didn't get any kind of the subprime or anything like that. They didn't have high levels of leverage. They weren't wholesale funding dependent. So their problems are very much the cause of the troubles of their own sovereign. And so I think until you stabilize the sovereigns and put and kind of restore confidence in the sovereigns, I don't. My concern is that it doesn't matter what capital. You could put an infinite amount of capital in the banks, and people would still not want to have anything to do with the banks. So I mean, and that's why we feel like stabilizing the banks. The ECB measures have been important, but ultimately it's having that sovereign backstop, that firewall, so that say the Italian government and the Spanish government have access to sort of affordable financing. That's what's going to stabilize the Italian banks, the French banks, the Spanish banks. They have a lot of capital already, but.
Yes, I want to turn to geopolitics. As you know, the two competitors now are China and the U.S. And the Europeans apparently are hoping for a bailout from China. And if this happens, the U.S., as stated in the Foreign Service Journal article here, will be left without a strategic partner. My question is, especially to the ambassador from Denmark, is Europe really eager to embrace a competitor of the U.S., namely China, because they have the funds?
I think, I'm not sure that the world is as white and black as you just described it. I mean, it's true that of course there is an interest through the IMF to have other countries helping to build the firewall or add to the firewall which is already built in Europe. But I don't think anybody in Europe is seeing that if China should step in and do some of that, which I'm not sure will happen, is seeing that as Europe selling its soul to China. I don't see any, can we say, change in the extremely close relationship and interdependence between Europe and the US because of this Euro crisis. And Europe continues, as was said by my colleague, to be the second largest economy in the world. If you look at trade between Europe and the US, it is by far the largest trade relationship in the world. And you can go on and on. If you look at our values, they are fit like hand in glove. If you look at the values of European values and Asian values, there are some distinct differences. So the fact that China might be asked to help in building up firewalls or other things doesn't mean that Europe is about to sell its soul to Asia and turn its back to the US. That will never happen. It's not going to happen in this context either.
One more question?
Well, yeah. A collective question from a class at American University. Dr. Dr. Jensen, you've been very clear about accession is good for Europe, more Europe is better. You've implied that Germany thinks along those lines. Is it at all helpful to look backwards for a moment as opposed to looking forward? There's been a lot of talk, of course, about premature accession to the EU. Would you say, you started this afternoon saying European leaders have done too little too late. There are those who say they did too much too early. How would you answer that?
Well, I don't think we shouldn't walk back just because we look back. If you look back, and I think sometimes it can actually be helpful to look back and see where we came from and remember for a minute why was Europe actually created, like European Union created. And if you look at it in that perspective, it has been an enormous success. The reason the outset was to actually avoid a war among European regional powers at the time. And this is unthinkable now because of, among other things, I think the instruments and the way that the European Union has pulled all European nations together. I'm not going to stand here and say, yes, it was a mistake when the Danish presidency in 2002 pushed for the enlargement by 10 countries, and we should have waited. I don't think it's true. I think it's better to get people inside the tent and then make things work than continuing to try to influence countries outside of the European Union. So I don't think it's true when you say we went too fast in this context. Greece has been part of Europe for many years, and we have had time, if you look at it in that perspective, to come up to speed on everything through that period. It wouldn't have changed anything had they been outside, except we wouldn't have been seized with the problem now. Nobody could have seen that back in 10 years ago. So I agree that, of course, you have to take into account what is the level of reforms that has been taken, but you also have to keep in mind what the positive impact that membership of the European has. And we continue to have instruments in place to ensure that member states actually follow and live up to the European acquis once they are inside the European Union. And once in a while we have member states who stray a little bit, and then you immediately have discussions about using the different instruments you have in the treaty to actually have people live up to our common values in the European Union.
Yeah, I would just say you've got to make a distinction between membership in the EU and membership in the Euro area. I mean, Central Europe is a tremendous economic success story, just how far they've come in 20 years. And I don't know if you can distinguish, I mean, yes, they've done a lot of hard work themselves, but without that European carrot, I don't know if it would have happened otherwise. And that's also hugely beneficial for the United States. I mean, Europe, and providing that carrot to these very strategically important countries is also delivered huge benefits for us. So.
And we didn't only do it for their sake, we also did it for our own sake.
Yeah.
It has been a huge benefit from the old Europe that we now have these new markets, and we speak with a stronger voice because we have more countries and more people.
I mean, look how well Poland is doing. I mean, they're doing just fine. Czech Republic's done very, very well throughout the crisis. So it wasn't EU membership that was not a negative by far.
Well, gentlemen, on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you both very much for a very enlightening and very, very encouraging session.
And Ambassador, I would just add to that, yes, thank you to the three of you for a very enlightening conversation. Thank you for the embassies that were represented here. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. And for all of you, just a reminder, a programming note, that our next program is going to be with Congressman Chris Van Hollen, who is the ranking member of the Budget Committee on March 8th. So we encourage you to attend that. There's a lot of interesting discussion about the international affairs budget, and we wish to have you here. All of these programs are sponsored under the banner of what's called the Fund for American Diplomacy. This is AFSA's charitable entity. We appreciate any support that you might be willing to give us as part of our 2012 $20.12 donation campaign. But most importantly, we appreciate your attendance, and as always, with all the programs that we do, we honor the men and women in the Foreign Service who represent our country, who are diplomats, who are patriotic, and who sacrifice overseas every day. So thank you, gentlemen, for your participation, and thank you for being here.